Left to die in the snow, an Apache woman was saved by a lone ex-soldier who gave her shelter. The cold came early that year, earlier than anyone in the hills could remember. Snow covered the high ground in thick, heavy layers, and the wind moved through the trees like a warning that something was wrong. For the Apache woman named Nalin, that winter would become the darkest time of her life. Nalin had grown up learning how to live with the land. She knew how to read the sky, how to feel changes in the air, and how to listen to the quiet signs of nature. The elders had always taught that the land was both a helper and a test. It could give life, but it could also take it away if people were careless or unlucky. Nalin respected the land deeply, but even her knowledge could not protect her from what was coming. Trouble had been growing in her community for many months. Outsiders had come closer to their lands, bringing fear, rumors, and anger. People became nervous. Trust became weak. Small problems turned into big arguments. Everyone felt like they were walking on thin ice, afraid that one wrong step could cause something terrible. Nalin was known as a quiet woman. She helped others, cared for children, and did her part in daily work. She did not seek attention, and she did not take sides in conflicts. But in times of fear, even good people can be blamed. One day, something valuable went missing in the village. No one knew for sure what happened, but whispers started. Someone said they had seen Nalin near the place earlier. Another said her family had old disagreements with others. Slowly, her name became connected to the problem, even though there was no real proof. At first, Nalin believed the truth would protect her. She thought people would remember her kindness and her honest life. But fear can make people forget what they know in their hearts. Meetings were held, voices were raised. Some people demanded that something be done to show strength and control. They did not want to look weak in front of outsiders. They wanted to make an example, even if it was the wrong one. One evening, as the sky turned gray and the wind picked up, Nalin was called to stand before the leaders. She tried to speak, to explain that she had done nothing wrong. Her voice shook, not because she was guilty, but because she could feel that minds were already made up. The looks in their eyes were not kind. They were filled with worry, anger, and a need to place blame somewhere. The decision was quick and cold. Instead of taking time to find the truth, they chose the fastest path. Pa, I, and I, and I. They told Nalin she had to leave, not for a short time, but for good. No proper supplies were given. No food was prepared for her. It was as if they wanted to forget her as quickly as possible. When she realized what was happening, her heart felt heavy. This was the place where she had been born, where she had laughed, worked, and dreamed. Now she was being pushed out into the snow, as if she no longer mattered. Some people looked away, unable to meet her eyes. A few seemed sorry, but they said nothing. Fear had made them silent. Nalin was given only a thin shawl and a small bundle of personal items. The cold air touched her face like a sharp reminder that the world outside the village was dangerous. The sun was already low, and the temperature was dropping fast. Every step away from the village felt like another door closing behind her. She walked slowly at first, hoping someone might call her back. Maybe someone would speak up. Maybe someone would stop this mistake, but no one did. The sounds of the village faded behind her. The wind became louder. The snow under her feet became deeper. As night began to fall, the cold grew stronger. Her hands started to feel stiff. Her breath came out in white clouds. She pulled her shawl tighter, but it was not enough. The hills around her looked the same in every direction. Trees stood like dark shadows against the pale ground. The path she thought she knew became harder to follow as fresh snow covered old tracks. Fear slowly turned into exhaustion. Each step took more effort. Her legs felt heavy, as if the snow was pulling her down. She tried to remember all the survival lessons she had learned, but without proper tools, food, or shelter, knowledge alone was not enough. She found the small rock area that blocked some of the wind and sat down to rest for a moment. She told herself it would only be for a short time, but the cold made her body want to sleep. Her eyes felt heavy. Her thoughts became slow. She thought about her childhood, about warm fires, shared meals, and stories told at night. Those memories felt very far away. Nalin knew that stopping for too long in such cold could be dangerous, but her body was tired. She tried to stand again, but her legs shook. She fell back into the snow. The cold around her felt quiet and endless. The world seemed to slow down. As the night grew darker, her hope grew thinner. She wondered if anyone would ever know what really happened to her. She wondered if her name would be remembered or if she would simply disappear, like so many footprints covered by snow. She whispered a small prayer, not asking for much, not for justice, not for revenge, just for one small chance to live. Just one kind moment in a very cold world. The wind answered only with more cold. Snowflakes landed on her hair and face, melting slowly, then freezing again. Her fingers were numb. She could barely feel them. Her thoughts became quiet, as if her mind was trying to protect her from fear. In that frozen silence, Nalin truly believed this was the end. Left alone, pushed away, surrounded by cold, she felt forgotten. The land she loved now felt like a wall she could not cross. The village that had been her home now felt like a distant dream. But even in that moment, when hope felt almost gone, something small still lived inside her, a tiny belief that maybe, just maybe, the world had not finished with her yet. She held on to that feeling as tightly as she could, even as her strength faded. The snow continued to fall, covering the ground, covering her tracks, and almost covering her story. To anyone passing by, it would look like nothing had happened. Just empty hills, just white land and cold wind. But beneath that snow lay a woman who had been treated unfairly, a woman who still wanted to live, a woman whose life was not over, even if it felt that way. That night in the frozen hills became the longest night of her life. It was a night filled with cold, fear, and silence. It was the night she was left to face the snow alone, with nothing but her will to survive and a quiet hope that somewhere, somehow, help might come. And in the deep cold of that winter, as the wind carried her breath away into the dark, her story was only beginning. Far away from the village, and deep in the quiet hills, a small wooden cabin stood alone near the edge of a frozen forest. Smoke slowly rose from its chimney, a thin gray line against the white sky. This cabin was the home of a man named Thomas Reed. Thomas had not always lived in such a lonely place. Many years earlier, he had been a soldier. He had seen places filled with noise, fear, and loss. When his time of service ended, he returned home. But home no longer felt the same. The memories followed him. Loud sounds made him tense. Crowded places made him uncomfortable. He felt safer where it was quiet, where he could hear his own thoughts and not be reminded of the past. So he built or bought the small cabin far from town. Life there was simple and hard, but it was peaceful. He cut his own firewood, fetched water from a nearby stream, and grew or hunted what little food he could. The long winters were especially difficult, but he was used to surviving with little. The cold did not scare him as much as people did. That evening, Thomas sat near his small fire, repairing an old glove. The wind outside was strong. Snow hit the cabin walls softly but steadily. The forest made low, deep sounds as trees moved in the storm. It was the kind of night when most people would not step outside unless they had no choice. As Thomas worked, he heard something strange. At first, it sounded like the wind. Then it sounded like an animal, a low, weak sound that did not fit with the usual forest noise. He stopped what he was doing and listened carefully. The sound came again, faint and broken. Thomas felt a familiar feeling in his chest, a mix of worry and caution. Living alone had taught him to be careful. Sometimes travelers passed through. Sometimes wild animals came close. Opening the door at night was never a simple choice. He stood up slowly, grabbed his thick coat, and moved toward the door. The sound came again, softer this time. It did not sound strong. It sounded like someone or something that was already losing strength. When Thomas opened the cabin door, cold air rushed inside. Snowflakes blew past his face. At first, he saw nothing but white and darkness. Then he saw a shape on the ground, near the steps, a human shape. His heart beat faster. He stepped closer, careful but concerned. In the weak light from the cabin, he saw a woman lying in the snow. Her face was pale. She barely moved. For a moment, Thomas froze. He had spent years trying to stay away from other people's troubles. He told himself that helping others often brought pain. But standing there, looking at a woman who clearly could not survive much longer in the cold, he knew he could not turn away. He bent down and touched her arm gently. Her skin was cold. She did not respond at first. Then her eyes opened slightly, unfocused and weak. She tried to speak, but no clear words came out. Thomas did not waste time. He carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, which worried him even more. Carrying her inside, he closed the door quickly to keep the cold out. He laid her near the fire and wrapped her in thick blankets. He moved with purpose, using habits he had learned long ago. He added more wood to the fire. He heated water. He checked her breathing. He spoke softly, even though he was not sure she could hear him. "It's okay," he said quietly.
"You're safe here." She did not answer, but her breathing became a little more steady as the warmth reached her. Thomas searched for signs of serious injury.
He did not see blood or broken bones, but the cold had clearly taken a heavy toll on her. Her hands were stiff, her lips were pale. She looked exhausted beyond words. He remembered basic care from his training. He did not try to rush things too fast. He knew sudden heat could be dangerous. He slowly warmed her, keeping her covered, letting the fire do its work little by little. As the minutes passed, he studied her face. Her features and clothing told him she was not from nearby towns. He guessed she was from a local tribe. He had seen some native people in trading posts long ago, but he had never spoken much with them. He wondered what had brought her so far into the frozen hills with no protection. Questions filled his mind, but he pushed them away. Right now, only one thing mattered: keeping her alive. Hours passed. The storm outside continued, but inside the cabin the fire crackled steadily. Thomas stayed awake, sitting nearby, watching her chest rise and fall. Every now and then she moved slightly, as if trying to wake from a deep, cold sleep. At one point, she whispered something in a language he did not understand. Her voice was weak, barely louder than the fire. Thomas leaned closer, trying to hear, but the words meant nothing to him. Still, the sound of her voice told him she was holding on. "Ba." He gave her small sips of warm water when she could swallow. He adjusted the blankets. He spoke gently, even though he knew she might not understand his words. Sometimes, hearing a calm voice could help more than anything else. As the night grew deeper, Thomas felt something he had not felt in a long time: a sense of purpose. For years he had been surviving only for himself, trying to forget the world. But now another life depended on him. He thought about how close she had come to being lost in the snow forever. If he had ignored that sound, if he had told himself it was just the wind, she would not have survived the night. That thought stayed with him, heavy and quiet. By early morning, the storm began to calm. The wind softened. The snow outside lay thick and clean. Inside the cabin, the woman's breathing was steadier. Her color was still weak, but she was alive. Thomas sat back in his chair, tired but alert. He did not know who she was. He did not know what trouble might follow her. But he knew one thing for sure: leaving her outside was never an option. In that lonely cabin, two strangers' lives crossed in the middle of a storm. One had been running from her past, the other had been hiding from his. And in the quiet warmth of a small fire, something changed for both of them. The frozen night that almost ended her life became the night that pulled Thomas back into the world. And without knowing it, both of them had just stepped onto a path that would change everything that came next. For the first 2 days after the storm, the woman remained very weak. Most of the time she slept. When she woke, her eyes moved slowly around the small cabin, as if she was trying to understand where she was. The warm fire, the wooden walls, and the quiet space were very different from the frozen hills where she had nearly lost her life. Thomas stayed close but did not crowd her. He knew from his past that people who had been through fear and cold needed time. He moved carefully, making small sounds so she would not be startled. He kept the fire going, melted snow for water, and cooked simple meals. When she was awake, he offered her warm broth and soft food that was easy to swallow. At first, she could only take a few spoonfuls before getting tired, but each time she seemed a little stronger. They did not share the same language, so words were difficult. When Thomas spoke, she listened, but he could tell she did not understand most of what he said. When she spoke, her words were in her own language. He could not understand them either. Still, they tried. They used simple gestures. Thomas would point to the cup before giving it to her. He would point to the fire, then to her, to show that the warmth was for her. She would nod slightly or look at him with tired eyes, showing she understood his care, even if not his words. One morning, she finally sat up on her own. It was a small movement, but for Thomas, it felt like a big victory. He smiled without thinking, then quickly looked away, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. She noticed the smile. For the first time, her lips moved into a very small, weak smile in return. That moment, simple as it was, broke some of the distance between them. Thomas realized she might not know his name. He gently touched his chest and said, "Thomas." He pointed to her in a questioning way. She looked at him, then slowly said, "Naylin." Thomas repeated it softly, "Naylin." Hearing her name made her feel more real to him. She was no longer just a stranger he had found in the snow. She was a person with a name, a story, and a life that mattered. As the days passed, Naylin slowly regained more strength. She could walk a few steps inside the cabin, holding on to the table or wall for support. Thomas stayed nearby, ready to help if she fell, but he tried not to make her feel helpless. They developed a quiet routine. In the morning, Thomas would prepare food. Naylin would sit near the fire, wrapped in blankets. When she felt stronger, She helped in small ways, like sorting dried herbs Thomas kept, or cleaning simple dishes. These small actions made her feel useful again. Thomas noticed that Nalin often looked out the small window toward the forest. Her eyes held a mix of fear and sadness. He guessed she was thinking about what she had lost. Even without words, he could feel the weight of her memories. Sometimes at night, Thomas would hear her breathe faster in her sleep, as if she was dreaming of the cold hills again. He would quietly add more wood to the fire and sit nearby until her breathing calmed. Nalin also watched Thomas closely. She saw how careful he was, how he moved with the habits of someone trained for danger. She noticed the way he sometimes stared into the fire for long moments, lost in thoughts he did not share. She could tell he carried his own pain, even if she did not know the details. Trust did not come quickly, but it came slowly, step by step. One afternoon, Thomas brought in a small animal he had caught for food. He cleaned it outside and cooked it carefully. When he offered some to Nalin, she hesitated at first, not because she was afraid of the food, but because accepting it felt like accepting a deeper kind of help. She looked at him, then slowly nodded and took the bowl. That small choice meant something. It meant she was beginning to believe she was safe. Later, she tried to tell him part of her story using gestures and simple sounds. She pointed to herself, then made a pushing motion away from her body. She pointed toward the forest and shook her head. Thomas understood enough to know she had been forced to leave somewhere. He did not ask more. He could see that talking about it, even in signs, was painful. Thomas, in his own way, also shared without words. He showed her an old, worn photo he kept in a small box. It was a picture from his past, taken long ago. He did not explain it, but the look on his face told her it was connected to memories that were not easy. They both learned that silence could be a kind of language, too. As the weather slowly improved, sunlight began to break through the clouds more often. The snow outside still lay deep, but the world felt a little less harsh. With each new day, Nalin's steps grew stronger. Her face had more color. Her eyes looked more alert. Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and worry. He was glad she was getting better. But he also knew that when she was strong enough, she might leave. Part of him wanted her to stay longer, not because he wanted to control her, but because her presence had changed the lonely rhythm of his life. Nalin also felt this change. For the first time since being pushed from her home, she felt a small sense of safety. The cabin was not her village, but it was warm. Thomas was not her family, but he was kind. That kindness mattered more than she could fully express. One evening, as they sat quietly by the fire, Nalin placed her hand lightly on her chest, then pointed toward Thomas and nodded. It was her way of saying thank you. Thomas understood. He nodded back and said softly, "You're welcome," even though he knew she might not understand the words. In that simple cabin, without long talks or deep explanations, something important was happening. Two people who had both been hurt by the world were learning to trust again, not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, everyday moments. A shared meal, a quiet smile, a fire kept burning through the night. These small things built a bridge between them. And in that quiet healing time, both Nalin and Thomas began to realize that survival was not just about staying alive. It was also about finding a reason to keep going, even when the past still felt heavy. In the stillness of the cabin, as snow slowly melted outside, two broken lives were slowly, carefully beginning to mend. As the days passed and Nalin grew stronger, a new kind of tension slowly entered the quiet life of the cabin. It did not come all at once. It came in small signs, small changes that Thomas noticed because he was used to watching for trouble. One morning, while gathering firewood near the edge of the trees, Thomas saw fresh tracks in the snow. They were not animal tracks. They were human. They were not old either. Someone had been nearby recently. He stood still for a long moment, studying the ground. His years of training had taught him how to read signs like this. The tracks were careful, spaced in a way that showed someone was moving slowly and watching their surroundings. This was not a lost traveler. This was someone looking for something. Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He covered the tracks as best he could with loose snow and returned to the cabin, keeping his movements calm so Nalin would not worry. Inside, Nalin noticed his change in mood right away. His face was more serious. His movements were sharper. She could feel that something was wrong, even if she did not know what. Later that day, Thomas heard distant voices carried by the wind. They were far away, but clear enough to know they were human. He moved quietly to the window and looked out, careful not to be seen. Two figures were moving along a ridge in the distance. They stopped from time to time, looking down into the trees, as if searching. Thomas's heart beat faster. His cabin was hidden but not invisible. If people were searching the area, it was only a matter of time before someone came closer. He turned to Nalin. He did not want to scare her, but he also did not want to hide the truth. He pointed toward the window, then made a searching motion with his hand, then shook his head slowly. Nalin's face changed. Her eyes filled with understanding and fear. She had been afraid of this moment. Deep inside, she knew that her past would not stay behind her forever. She sat down slowly, holding her hands together. Her breathing became shallow. Even without words, Thomas could see that she believed these people might be connected to the trouble she had escaped. That night, neither of them slept much. Every sound outside felt louder. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. The creaking of the cabin sounded like someone touching the door. Thomas kept the fire low to avoid drawing attention. He sat with his back to the wall, listening. Nalin lay on her bed of blankets, staring at the ceiling. Her body was safe and warm, but her mind was far away, back in the memories she wanted to forget. She remembered being blamed. She remembered being pushed away. She remembered the cold hills. The fear returned, tight and heavy. The next day, the signs became clearer. Someone had walked closer to the cabin. Thomas found more tracks, this time not far from his water source. He could tell they had stopped and looked around. This was no longer a simple risk. This was real danger. Thomas made a decision. He could not just wait and hope they would leave. He needed to prepare. He packed a small bag with food, water, and basic supplies. He showed it to Nalin. He pointed to it, then to the forest, then to the cabin, making it clear they might need to move quickly if things became worse. Nalin looked at the bag, then at Thomas. Her eyes showed both fear and trust. She did not want to run again. She was tired of running, but she also did not want to bring danger to the man who had saved her life. She shook her head slightly and pointed to Thomas, then made a pushing away motion, like before. This time, it meant something different. It meant she was willing to leave alone if it kept him safe. Thomas understood her meaning, and it made him angry in a quiet way. Not at her, but at the situation. He shook his head firmly. He pointed to himself, then to her, then placed his hand flat between them, showing unity. He was not going to send her away to protect himself. He had already made his choice. Nalin's eyes filled with emotion. She looked down, then nodded slowly. She accepted his decision, even though it scared her. Later that afternoon, two men appeared closer to the cabin than ever before. Thomas saw them from behind a tree. They were armed, not in a wild way, but in a controlled, serious way. Their faces showed focus, not kindness. They did not knock on the cabin door right away. They walked around the area, looking at the ground, studying tracks, speaking quietly to each other. Thomas stayed hidden, watching. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. If they found the cabin, there would be questions. He did not know how much danger Nalin was truly in, but he could feel that these men were not just passing through. Nalin stayed inside, holding her breath every time she heard movement outside. Her body remembered what it felt like to be hunted by fear and blame. She felt small again, like she had in the frozen hills. After what felt like hours, the men moved on, heading deeper into the forest. Thomas waited a long time before stepping out of hiding. He watched until they were completely gone. When he returned to the cabin, Nalin looked at him with wide eyes, silently asking what had happened. He made a walking motion with 2 fingers, then pointed away from the cabin. He held up 2 fingers to show there were 2 people. Then he made a searching gesture again. Nalin closed her eyes for a moment. She knew now that the danger was real. The past was not finished with her. That evening, they sat together in heavy silence. The fire crackled softly, but neither of them felt calm. The cabin, once a place of healing, now felt like a place that could be discovered at any time. Thomas finally broke the silence in his own way. He spread out a rough map he had drawn of the area. He pointed to a path that led farther into the mountains, to a place even more remote. He pointed to Nalin, then to the map, then to the path. His eyes asked a clear question. Nalin studied the map. She knew moving deeper into the wilderness was dangerous. The land would be harder. The cold would still be there, but staying might be worse. She nodded slowly. That decision changed everything. They spent the next day preparing quietly. Thomas packed only what was necessary. Nalin wrapped her few personal items carefully. They moved like people who knew time was short. Every sound made them pause. Every shadow made them look twice. The threat had not touched them yet, but it had changed their lives. The simple healing days were over. Now they were facing a choice between fear and courage. For Thomas, this meant stepping back into a world of danger he had tried to leave behind. For Nalin, it meant running again, but this time with someone by her side. They did not know if the people searching would return. They did not know how far the danger would follow them, but they knew one thing. The quiet safety they had found in the cabin was fragile. The world outside had remembered Nalin, and now both of them had to decide how much they were willing to risk to protect a second chance at life. As night fell, they sat close to the fire one last time in that cabin. The walls had seen healing. Now they saw fear, strength, and quiet determination. Whatever came next, they would not face it alone. And in that heavy, uncertain silence, the past reached out, reminding them that survival was no longer just about cold and hunger. It was about people, and people could be far more dangerous than any winter storm. Before the first light of morning touched the snowy hills, Thomas and Nalin were already awake. The cabin was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of packing and careful movement. The fire had burned low, and the air inside was cold, but both of them were too focused to notice. Thomas checked the small packs one last time. Inside were simple things: dried food, a water container, extra cloth, and a few basic tools. It was not much, but it was enough to start the journey. He handed one pack to Nalin and showed her how to adjust the straps. She nodded, copying his movements. For a moment, both of them stood still in the center of the cabin. This small place had become more than just wood and stone. It had been a place of rescue, healing, and quiet trust. Leaving it felt like leaving a safe island behind. Nalin walked slowly to the door and looked back at the room. Her eyes moved over the fire pit, the table, and the small sleeping area. These simple things had helped save her life. She placed her hand lightly on the wooden wall, as if saying goodbye. Thomas noticed. He felt the same way, even though he had lived there for years. He had thought this cabin was where he would grow old, alone and hidden from the world. Now he realized that life had other plans. They stepped outside together. The cold air filled their lungs. The sky was pale, and the snow reflected soft early light. The forest was quiet, as if holding its breath. Thomas led the way, choosing paths that were harder to see, avoiding open areas. Nayland followed closely, her steps careful but steady. She was stronger now, but the journey was still difficult. The snow was deep, and the land was uneven. Each step took effort. They did not speak much. They did not need to. Their focus was on moving forward, staying alert, and watching for any sign that someone might be following. As they moved higher into the mountains, the land became more wild. Trees grew closer together. Rocks broke through the snow. The wind was stronger, colder. It felt like the world was testing their choice. Several times, they stopped to rest. Thomas would scan the area while Nayland drank small sips of water. He watched her closely, not in a controlling way, but in a protective way. He wanted to make sure she did not push herself too hard. At one rest stop, Nalin pointed to the sky, then to the land ahead, making a motion that showed distance and difficulty. Thomas understood. She was asking how far they still had to go. He pointed forward, then made a small circle with his hand, showing that it would take time. He then pointed to both of them and nodded, showing that they would face it together. Nalin gave a small, tired smile. As the day went on, they reached a narrow valley where the wind was blocked by tall rock walls. The air there was calmer. Thomas decided this was a good place to rest longer and eat. They sat on a flat rock, sharing dried food. It was not much, but after hours of walking, even simple food tasted better. Nalin looked around the valley. The place felt hidden, protected. She touched the ground and then her chest, a quiet way of saying she felt a little safer here. Thomas nodded. He felt it too. That night, they made a small, hidden fire, careful to keep the smoke low. The flames gave light and warmth, but also reminded them to stay alert. Thomas took first watch while Nalin slept. As he sat there, he thought about how his life had changed in such a short time. He had gone from wanting to be alone to caring deeply about another person's safety. It surprised him, but it also felt right. Later, when Nalin woke for her turn to watch, Thomas slept lightly. Even in rest, he was ready to wake at any sound. Over the next few days, they continued deeper into the mountains. The journey tested them both. There were moments when Nalin slipped and Thomas caught her. There were moments when Thomas was tired and Nalin offered him water first. These small actions showed something important. They were no longer just a rescuer and someone being helped. They were partners in survival. One afternoon, they saw signs of a small settlement far in the distance. Thin lines of smoke rose into the sky. Thomas stopped and studied it carefully. He pointed toward the smoke, then looked at Nalin with a questioning expression. Nalin stared at the distant signs for a long moment. Her face showed mixed feelings. Hope and fear lived side by side in her eyes. She did not know who lived there. She did not know if they would be kind or dangerous, but she also knew that staying hidden forever was not a real life. She nodded slowly. As they moved closer, they became more careful. Thomas made sure their hands were empty and visible. He wanted to show they were not a threat. When they finally reached the edge of the settlement, a few people noticed them. There was tension at first. Curious and cautious eyes watched them. Thomas stood slightly in front of Nayland, not to block her, but to show support. He spoke calmly, using simple words and gestures to explain that they were travelers and needed help. Some of the people spoke in a language Thomas did not understand, but Nayland recognized parts of it. It was closer to what she knew. She stepped forward carefully and spoke softly. There was a long moment of silence. Then, one older woman stepped forward. She looked at Nayland closely, as if reading her face, her tired eyes, her thin frame. Something in Nayland's story, even without full words, reached her. The older woman nodded and motioned for them to come closer. That small gesture changed everything. They were given water first, then warm food, then a place to rest. It was not luxury. It was simple and basic, but to Nayland, it felt like a second rescue. Thomas stayed close, watching, ready to step in if anything felt wrong. But slowly he saw that these people were not looking to harm them. Over the next days, Nayland spoke more with those who shared similar roots. She learned where she was and who these people were. They were not her village, but they understood her world better than most. For the first time since being pushed into the snow, Nayland felt a small sense of belonging again. Thomas watched this with mixed feelings. He was happy for her, truly happy, but he also knew what it meant. She was finding a place where she might stay. One evening, Nayland sat beside Thomas. She pointed to the settlement, then to herself, then placed her hand on her heart. She was telling him that this place could be her new beginning. Then she pointed to Thomas and touched her heart again. It was her way of saying that even if their paths separated, she would never forget what he had done for her. Thomas nodded slowly. His chest felt heavy, but not with regret, with respect. He had not saved her to keep her with him. He had saved her so she could live. The next morning, Thomas prepared to leave. He packed his few things. Nayland stood beside him. There were no big speeches, no dramatic goodbyes. They stood facing each other in the cold morning air. Nayland placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly in respect. Thomas did the same. They had no shared language for long goodbyes, but they did not need one. Thomas turned and walked back toward the mountains, his path leading him into a quieter life once more. Nayland watched him go until he was a small shape against the white land. She was no longer the woman left to die in the snow. She was a survivor. And Thomas, the lonely ex-soldier, walked away knowing that in saving her, he had also saved a part of himself. Their lives moved in different directions, but the winter that brought them together would live in both their hearts forever.